What is up, RPG nerds? This is your good man, Mr. Rote Sr. from RPG Ranked. And if you enjoy RPG videos, please consider liking and subscribing. We've got a lot of other cool videos on the channel. In this video, I will be talking about my favorite boss from every RPG that I've played. We've done a lot of these every RPG that we've played videos, from characters to more characters to songs. At least we're planning to if we haven't done it yet. But there's going to be a lot of these type of videos in the future. But we're going to get right into this. And it's going to be in release date order, starting with Final Fantasy 1. And my favorite boss in the original Final Fantasy is not in the original version of the game, actually. It is going to be Chronadia from the newer releases. So a lot of the bosses are a little bit one note in this game. It's all just temper, haste, protera, invisora, healing, death. That's basically what you do. You just beat up the boss that way. However, Chronadia takes a little bit more of a spin on things by being able to cancel out certain abilities and making a boss actually hard in Final Fantasy 1. What Chronadia does is takes, like, let's say, your items command, and will just disable it. And that sounds really annoying, but in this case, since Final Fantasy 1 isn't that hard, it's kind of cool. And you'll get a boss where you have to really strategize. So let's say Temper and Haste aren't available, then you have to think about using your Giant's gloves and your white robes and all the stuff in your inventory and just trying to experiment. And then when it disables your magic or and you have to be really, especially in the hardest form of Chronadia, you have to really pay attention to what you're doing. Because if your healing gets taken away, you got to be like, oh frick, now let's get Protera all the way up as soon as possible so I don't die, you know? It's really fun. I really do like the fight against Chronadia. It's a very fun one. And I will say a lot of the bosses on this list will be super bosses or final bosses, just so you know. I will be including those in this video. But yeah, so Chronadia is my favorite boss in Final Fantasy 1. Right, in Final Fantasy 2, Emperor. Just the Emperor, the light and the dark versions. So not like the first time you fight him in the Cyclone. That's really easy and boring with the wood golems and stuff. But the final boss and the final boss of Solar Rebirth, I would probably say the Solar Rebirth has the slight edge for being harder and more interesting since you have those four characters. However, yeah, so probably the Light Emperor, but just both of them are super fun. It really takes FF2 and it takes all the grinding up you've done and all that and just finishes off the game with a very awesome final boss fight. One of my favorite final boss fights of the Final Fantasy games. It's very fun. If you use the blood sword, it's very boring, so don't do that. But yeah, utilizing all your tomes in your inventory, using your high-level spells, beating up the boss, even when Leon kind of sucks. There's a lot of fun stuff here, and I just really liked these boss fights. And since, like, none of the boss fights had any super interesting mechanics, Damien from the PSP version is a little interesting, but I still think I like the Emperor fights better. Since this whole time, the Emperor's been blowing up the world and stuff, and you're just like, let's kill him. I've been waiting for this. But yeah, the Emperor fights were my favorite. They were climactic, and they were awesome. Alright, next one will be FF3, which I feel like a lot of people won't agree with me on this, but you know what? I agree with myself on this, and that's going to be Cloud of Darkness. I love that you can basically, it's kind of like, I don't know, in like Breath of the Wild, where you beat up the 4 minions or whatever, and it weakens the main boss. And if you can just decide to go right into the Cloud of Darkness, you'll probably get owned immediately. But if you go throughout the World of Darkness and beat the other 4 bosses, I mean, Cloud of Darkness is still hard even if you've beaten the other 4 bosses. But it's really cool because basically you can pick your own difficulty and you can be like, is it worth killing the other bosses or do I just want to go right to the Cloud of Darkness? It is annoying that you can't save first, I will admit, and if you die, you have to start over the whole dungeon, which is super annoying. However, other than that fact, I absolutely love this boss because you get like a boss gauntlet, and as long as boss gauntlets are unfair, like Galdera in Octopath Traveler 1, like, I love boss gauntlets in general, and I just really, really liked the Cloud of Darkness fight. It was awesome. And it was one of the bosses, it's one of like the 3 bosses in the game that didn't feel super easy, so it was awesome. Well, next, let's move on to FF4, and I actually have a different opinion for the 2D and the 3D releases. I'm going to say from the 2D version, probably the 4 Fiends fight. Like I said, I love boss gauntlets so that you get to fight all 4 of them again. Beat them up right in a row. It's super fun. There's some other good bosses, obviously. like Golbez fight. The final boss is fun. But I like the Four Fiends because we got to fight them all again in a row. Fun boss gauntlet, all that stuff. However, in the 3D version of the game, my favorite boss is easily Gurion, the super boss. It is the Four Fiends, technically, into one creature, so I guess it's not really any different. But, it's a very different fight, but it's still the same people you're fighting, technically. But the Gurion fight, whereas the Proto-Babel fight, I feel like you need to have too much of a strategy that it's kind of obscure and kind of boring, because you need to take exactly this much damage, or else he'll go into this phase, and then he immediately kills you. That's boring, I'm going to be honest. Gurion, you just give it all you got. You get all your good augments on, and there's not any, like, really specific strategy that kind of ruins the point of the boss, but it's also a very fun super boss. So Gurion, I liked much more than Proto-Babel. Again, I did like the final boss. I still love the Four Fiends fight, but Gurion was a great super boss, so that's going to be my favorite boss. Alright, Final Fantasy V. I'm picking an interesting one. This one's actually a story battle. And if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead a little bit if you haven't played Final Fantasy V. So probably say skip ahead a minute or two. However, this is my favorite fight. It's going to be the scripted battle against Exdeath with Galuf. This might be my favorite part of the whole game, even. Because honestly, second half of the game, you just cheese all the bosses with rapid fire and double cast. And the first half of the game, you're cheesing everything with like monks and stuff. And I will admit, as always, I don't love the job system in this game since you can only equip one bonus skill and it drives me crazy. However, and that's why my favorite fight, as much as like the Gilgamesh fights are hilarious and fun, my favorite fight is this scripted story battle because Galuf was my favorite character and this was just heartbreaking. It was a very emotional moment in a game that was otherwise very lighthearted, and Galuf's sacrifice was insane, and the fact that, especially if you have him as like a white mage, it's kind of funny. But if you have, it's kind of powerful too, because he has 0 health and he's still fighting because he is not going to let his friends die. You know, the power of friendship and all that stuff. I really, really liked this battle. It just was such a good story plot thingy, and although he's replaced by Krill, who I also like, Galuf was my favorite character in Final Fantasy V, and seeing him die in such a heroic way was crazy. It was insane. And whereas, like, yes, Tella's death was great in FF4, I feel like I like this one a little better, and because I like the FF4 bosses in general a lot more than I like the FF5 bosses. So, yeah, this scripted battle was my favorite in FF5. Alright, FF6, I'm going to have to go with the final Kefka fight. I love boss gauntlets, and I also love when you get to make multiple parties and fight a boss fight. It's so epic to me. Like, I know some people think that's annoying, but I think it's so epic. And just assembling your parties, thinking of a good strategy. I mean, he's not that hard, so you probably don't really need to think of strategy too hard. But Kefka, super fun. Multiple parties, multiple phases, stealing crazy items, amazing boss music. It's all there. It's just amazing as a whole. Like, the Kefka fight's awesome. Alright, next I'm going to move. I didn't really have too much to say about that one, so let's move on to Live Alive. I'm not doing Final Fantasy for a little bit. And in Live Alive, it was hard. I almost picked the Mammoth King, but then I was like, okay, that's too RNG. So I went with the Koi Fish boss, Lord Iwama, that you fight in the Twilight of Edo Japan chapter. I loved this boss fight because it takes a lot of strategy, but it isn't quite as stupidly unfair as the Mammoth King. And since your main character is actually, like, powerful and can do the tiles on his own, it's really fun. I also loved the other boss in that chapter, like the Wandering Swordsman or whatever. But Lord Iwama was my favorite fight in the game. Whereas all the bosses in the final chapter were incredibly easy, this one required a lot of strategy, but not nearly as much RNG as the Mammoth King fight. So I loved this one. There were a lot of other cool fights, like the Iron Giant versus Odio fight, or let's see, I don't know, the T-Rex fight was cool. The boss gauntlet at the China chapter, like, that was also one of my favorites. Like, there's a lot of good bosses. I liked a lot of the bosses in this game, but I'm going to go with Lord Iwama because I felt like it required the most strategy of any boss in the game. Alright, let's move on to Chrono Trigger, which this is kind of cheating because I technically didn't actually fight this boss fight because I wanted this character in my party. By the way, skip ahead if you don't want spoilers again. But this fight was against Magus, and I didn't actually do it, but I've like watched videos and stuff because I wanted Magus in my party. I didn't want to kill him. But in terms of story, this is the best boss fight in my opinion from what I've seen, and it's powerful for Robo to finally take down the person who cursed him and stuff. And yes, I'd rather have Magus in my party, so that's kind of a drawback. So I would say some of my other favorites, probably like Ocean Palace Lavos, trying to beat him up and it actually being kind of challenging. But like Magus, I'm gonna have to say is my favorite. I mean, I like the I don't even remember his name, the green guy. Why don't I remember his name? But like the minions are very fun too. But just Magus really contributed to the story a lot, and I felt like that he was definitely the best boss fight. Alright, let's move on to Final Fantasy VII. I'm going to have to go to the final boss fight. One-Winged Angel, so iconic. And yes, it's not a very hard boss fight. It's really easy to cheese. Just like, I don't know. I mean, even the weapon fights aren't even that bad in my opinion. But Save for Sephiroth was my favorite fight in the game. You're finally beating up Sephiroth. It has the best music. Awesome, especially the Advent Children version. Mostly the Advent Children version, in my opinion. I think the original version's a little bit underwhelming compared to that. However, anyway, Final Fantasy VII, fantastic final boss. Loved it, and it's my favorite boss in the game. Alright, same thing with FF8 as I was saying about FF6. Multiple party member deal. I mean, this one's a little bit more annoying than an FF6, but it's multi-phase, multiple party members, and that's going to be the final boss. Again, like I said, there's going to be quite a few final bosses on here. However, I just love the final boss of this game because it was the most grand fight. It was crazy. There's a lot going on. 3 forms, all that stuff. I think 3, maybe 4. I can't even remember. But you get to play as like a lot of the different party members, and it actually is a little bit challenging if you get like a party of Selphie, Quistis, and Renoa. If you didn't buff up her Angel Wing limit break. But like, yeah, it has a little bit of challenge and it can be a little frustrating, but I didn't care because I equipped all my party members anyway before the fight. But I really liked this fight. It was awesome. Our next is going to be Final Fantasy IX, and my favorite boss in this game is Ozma because, first of all, it's the hardest boss by far. Second of all, it's not even hard in my opinion. It's a little bit hilarious how everyone talks about Ozma's like the hardest thing ever. I beat him on like level 25 or 30 with Zidane, Aiko, Steiner, and Freya or something like that. It's not that bad. Everyone thinks it's the hardest thing ever, but I think it's very fun. Actually, I might have had Vivi in my party using Doomsday. I can't really remember, but I definitely was somewhere in the 20s or 30s. I think it's funny how everyone's like, be a level 99, equip all this stuff. I'm like, y'all, I don't even know. But this was the ultimate challenge of the game. And in a game where like 99% of the boss fights are pushovers, in my opinion, even when I was like an 8-year-old, yeah, Ozma was like the one fight I was like, you know what? This wasn't the easiest thing ever, but yeah, had a little bit of a challenge compared to the other boss fights. Next is going to be Final Fantasy X. I want to say Penance because you fought all these Dark Aeons. You fought all these Nemesis, you've gone through all the monster arena, you've all done all this stuff, and then you get to the final challenge. There's so many freaking challenges in this game. So when you finally get to this fight, you're like, thank heavens, I can finally be done with the grind. But also it's very epic. And does it require much more than quick hits and good auto abilities? No, not really. But it is still a very fun fight. And it is like the ultimate final fight. I would maybe say the final boss, but that thing is so easy even if you don't fight it after. Like, it's really easy, especially if you've already grinded it up. Like, I just one-shotted it with Wakka's attack reels. But if you actually, like, decided to fight it right away, it'd probably be more fun, but I still think Penance is my favorite boss. Alright, for Paper Mario. This one's a little bit tough. Only a little bit, though. There's 3 bosses I like a lot. The final Bowser fight, Crystal King, and Huff and Puff. I'm going to go with Crystal King. A lot of times I'll say Bowser's my favorite, but I mean, Bowser is just Bowser. There's a lot of Bowser fights in every Mario game, so I wanted to pick something different for this list. And I'm picking the Crystal King. It was just very cool. It was one of the bosses that actually had a decent amount of defense, had a fire weakness, which made it interesting. Not that I used that, I used Watt. But it's just very fun because, like, it's a great ending to one of the best chapters in the game. Not my personal favorite, but probably the most well-crafted chapter in the game. It's fantastic. It requires a bit of strategy. I'd say it's also, those 3 bosses I named off are probably the 3 hardest bosses as well. And they have the most interesting mechanics to them. And I thought the Crystal King was my favorite because it was like the hardest boss other than Bowser. And you know, as much as I love Bowser, I just feel like this fight was more unique, interesting, and really fit with the whole vibe of the chapter. So I loved the Crystal King fight. Alright, let's move on to Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. No, wait. Final Fantasy X-2, I think. Yes. Final Fantasy X-2 first. My favorite boss was Angra Menu or whatever. It's the one you find in the desert, and it is actually hard. And that's probably the only reason I like it. Because you actually have to beat up something with a high amount of health. I don't know. I didn't like any of the bosses in this game, honestly. So, yeah. I guess this one's my favorite. Alright, not Final Fantasy. The Thousand Year Door. I can't talk for the life of me. And Thousand Year Door, my favorite boss, is going to be the boss gauntlet. Again, me and my boss gauntlets. The little boss gauntlet of Bowser and Kammy Koopa and Grodus. I loved this so much. I mean, the Shadow Queen, fantastic. Cortez, awesome. Dupless, awesome. Loved all that. But the fact I get 2 of my favorite bosses in the game, individually, I would probably say they're worse than the Shadow Queen. Or maybe a couple other bosses. But when you get these 2 bosses in a row, it's an awesome fight. It's really fun. You're like weakened, you're ready to go, and then all of a sudden Bowser shows up, and it's just awesome. I loved it. 2 of my favorite bosses in the game right in a row. I'm not complaining. Alright, next is one of my favorite games, Blue Dragon. And in Blue Dragon, my favorite boss is the Azure Abyssal Dragon. My second favorite boss in the game has 2 phases, multiple targets, the Grand Zabo and the, his minions. So you're probably like, bruh, why do you like Azure Abyssal Dragon more? Well, this boss is cool because it has multiple sections, and each time you beat a section, the next section pops up or whatever. So technically, it's kind of like it has like 6 phases because each little, each part you have to beat up, and then you move on to the next one. One of the harder bosses in the game. It's not one of the super bosses, of course, really. Well, I guess it kind of is, but it's an optional boss, but not a super boss. It's a fun fight. I really liked it, especially in hard mode, where it took like 3 corporeals per section. It was really fun. There was a lot of intense action, let's just say that. Alright, let's move on to a different game, Super Paper Mario. This was hard. I couldn't just pick one for this game. Either Fractale, the first major boss in the game, or Dementio's second fight. So Fractale is just so freaking cool, right? Like, you have to flip into 3D, jump on the back of a dragon, and start beating him up. It's so cool. One of my favorite bosses in the whole series. Also, Dementio 2, while you're fighting the boss, it takes you back through all of the previous areas, which is also awesome because of nostalgia and stuff. I think Fractale is really the best, the most innovative. Like, I haven't seen anything like this really, but also you gotta use like Fleep during Dementio 2 and stuff, so it's a close tie there. I think it's gonna be Fractale edging out a little bit, but I wanted to mention Dementio 2 as well. Alright, next is gonna be weird, because Lost Odyssey, I love almost all the bosses in this game. However, I'm gonna say Bogomore, I don't even know how you pronounce it. I'm gonna say that's my favorite boss in the game because it was so good, and it set up a precedent for how good the other bosses were. And it was just very fun, it was epic, and it was the hardest boss in the game, so the fact that it's the hardest made it more fun for me because a lot of the later bosses get kind of easy. But I love almost all the bosses in the game, except for some of the super easy ones like the Holy Beast. But yeah, I love this boss because it set up how good all the other bosses are going to be in the future, and because it's hard. So yeah. Alright, let's move on to the next, which is going to be Final Fantasy IV: The After Years. So this game is pretty mid. honestly. But what I do love is the amount of characters you get, which means the final chapter is easily the best chapter in the game. And because the final chapter, the final part of the final chapter is going to be the final boss. And therefore, the final boss is my favorite boss in the game. Because you can pick whatever the heck party you want, and it's kind of fun. It's actually a little bit difficult if you don't pick a good party, because of course that's how it always is if you're choosing a bad party against a boss, but whatever. Anyway, I liked this boss fight because it was the best boss fight. And none of the boss fights were that good in this game. And it was one of the few that wasn't just like a rehash. Like, it was a different boss than most of the like other bosses in the game. It goes from Mom Bomb to Dad Bomb, right? But, or like, you refight Bahamut and stuff. Wow, so interesting. However, fighting like evil Rydia, that's interesting. So, definitely my favorite boss, the creator. Alright, next is going to be Tales of Vesperia. I feel like my favorite fights in this game were in the Colosseum, and especially the Colosseum team battle finale. The one where you get to fight your own party members, you get to fight people from previous games, you get to fight all this crazy stuff. And it's really cool. Beating up your own party members is always kind of fun, so love this boss fight. Alright, next is going to be Final Fantasy Dimensions. I think the most interesting fights in this game were going to be the Gladiators Hall bosses, the post-game bosses. Other bosses are all fine, I guess. I mean, they're good. I can't really literally remember like any of them except for these Gladiators Hall bosses, which I feel like is kind of sad, but it's kind of true. I think that these are the best because like they would level up and you could like they were actually kind of hard, so you had to get different strategies, really utilize your F abilities, utilize all your jobs, and it was more fun than the other boss fights. And if you like just wanted to fight them once and stuff, then you could keep them easy, or you could just grind them out level 6. It's pretty rough, but eventually like you'll find some really cool strategies to help you beat it, so I thought it was fun. Golden Sun Dark Dawn, I'm gonna have to say Dolahan, the hardest boss in the game. This game was incredibly easy, so the fact that one of the bosses actually required a lot of strategy made it be my favorite boss in the game. Dolahan really was my favorite. I really liked it because I had to use my summons perfectly, I had to utilize Feda's beast form perfectly, I did assign the right Jin, like I did strategize all this crap, and I actually died a couple times, so that was kind of fun. Alright, Tales of Xillia, I don't even remember what the boss fight was. I think it's like you're like fighting a gauntlet of a bunch of enemies during this war, and then you're fighting the big dude with the hammer, Pressa, and then you fight Gaius soon after, so that little like portion of the game, I don't really even know what it was. I also really liked the Noctigal fight and the Maxwell fight. Like, there were a lot of good ones. Or Ivor being like a complete idiot. It was hilarious. But I think my favorite was fighting Pressa, the big hammer guy, and then fighting Gaius soon afterwards. That was fun. Alright, next is going to be Ni no Kuni. I'm going to say Shadar was definitely my favorite boss fight. The 3-form boss fight, I thought it was more interesting than the White Witch fight because the 3 forms were very different. And because Shadar really was the villain we cared about. I mean, the White Witch was very interesting. I'm glad she was in the game. But Shadar is my favorite boss in the game. And why? Well, the first form is Shadar. You're, like, epic. And then the second form, you get to fight, like, I don't know. Is it, like, his familiar? It's not even, like, a familiar. But you're fighting this, like, Eternal Night thing, which is its own beast. Like, a completely different fight. And then you get to fight the most unique boss in the game, Shadar's third form, where instead of like running around the normal battlefield, you're on this like weird floating platform, and the boss, it's like not 2D, but like the boss is in front of you and you're avoiding its attacks, and things are like air striking from the top and stuff. This is definitely the most interesting boss. Like, whereas like the White Witch fight, it's again you fight the White Witch first, and then you fight like a alternative form, but then the third form is kind of just like royal jelly with a skin font on, like. But here we've got something completely different with the final Shadar form, and I thought that made this easily my favorite boss fight in the game. Well, next, let's move on to Fantasy Life. So Fantasy Life is weird because all the bosses are kind of fun, and it's kind of like a huge part of the game, fighting, because of the different fighting classes, the 4 classes or whatever that we're fighting. And it was really weird to pick one because, like, the harder the bosses got, usually the more fun they were. But I'm going to pick the boss fight that really got me interested in the bosses in this game. That is the Gigante and the Ancient Ruins, or whatever they're called. Because it was the first time I ran into one of the hard boss enemies. And I had no idea what was happening. And I, like, was like, I'm not going to let myself lose. So I used like 1,000,000 healing potions, I used all my food, I used like all my resources to beat this guy, thinking he was like the hardest boss fight in the game because I thought I just ran into something really hard. Obviously that's not the case now that I've looked back and I've played through the whole game and stuff. But Gigante was the fight that got me interested in all these epic bosses that are in Fantasy Life. So I'm going to have to say Gigante was my favorite. Next, Final Fantasy Dimensions 2. I'm going to go with the 4 Holy Beasts fight. It's the hardest boss fight in the game. It required strategy. You had to actually like put up protective stuff. I mean, the Proto-Babel fight is requires a little bit of strategy. Some of those other ones in the Tower of Babel, but by that point you get really OP equipment, so it's not that hard. Whereas here, you're at a really weird point in the game where it's like, shouldn't be like, that you don't have any of the good equipment, but it's also very hard because you're fighting 4 people at the same time, and they're not even that easy, and they're ninjas, so they go super fast. So it's like the hardest boss fight. It requires the most strategy, and it's usually either like the final boss, the most epic bosses on this list, or the ones that actually require strategy. And in this case, it's the strategy one, right? Next is going to be Octopath Traveler, and I'm going to say Red Eye was my favorite boss because it was just awesome. It's like the only thing in the whole game that can petrify you and stuff, and it's all the setup. I didn't really like Haunted's story that much, but it ended off with a huge bang. It blew my expectations out of the water, and I loved the Red Eye fight. It was my favorite, I think, in the whole game. It's just like the one I cared the most about beating because to save the master and stuff. I mean, I don't know. Some of the other ones were interesting, like Werner. I really wanted to kill him, but he wasn't really interesting. But all the Primrose, Matthias or whatever his name was like an important fight. No, Matthias is the Ophelia, dang it. Whatever the Primroses one, I don't know. But like, those bosses were all cool, but Red Eye really was the most fun in my opinion. Was it the most like bad? I mean, it's a creature like Helgendish or all the Primrose guys, or I don't know, Matthias or any of those I care more about killing, kind of, but like also this was epic. It was an epic beast, basically like Medusa. I don't know, I really liked it. I don't really know why it's my favorite, but it really was my favorite. And the last game on this list, looking here now, I feel like I haven't even played that many RPGs now that this is all of them, but the last game on this list is Octopath Traveler 2, and my favorite fight in this game was the V-Day fight. Not the Galdera fight. Galdera's fine, but I found V-Day to be way more interesting, because Galdera, you have 2 separate parties, there's 2 forms, blah blah blah, it's kind of fun. But no, in V-Day, you get 2 forms that you fight at the same time simultaneously with the 2 parties, and you can just switch between them whenever you want. So if one of your party is really low on health, you can switch to the other party and have them tank the hit. It was really cool. And you heal everybody, but he can't hit everybody, which is awesome. Like, it's just a very interesting, fun fight. You get to use all 8 Octopath Travelers at the same time, which never happened in the first game. And this was easily my favorite boss fight. Whereas Galdera kind of pissed me off in the first game because, you know, that stupid boss gauntlet. That's like the one boss gauntlet I've ever hated in my life. But, other than that boss gauntlet, like, Galdera might have been my favorite in that game, but I just thought V-Day took everything that was good about Galdera and made it way more epic. Sure, it's easier, but other than that, it is just better in every way, in my opinion. Thank you guys all for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, check out some other RPG videos on the channel. We've got a ranking, we've got some other boss videos here. We've got a top 13 hardest bosses. We've got top 10 easiest super bosses. Got some other super boss coming. Top 10, I have 2 top 10 hardest super boss videos coming, as well as another top 13 bosses video, because there are quite a few interesting bosses in RPGs. So if you enjoy RPGs or RPG bosses, consider liking and subscribing and checking out more videos on the channel. Thank you guys all for watching, and have a great day. Peace out, RPG nerds.